Hey guys, today is the day. I've been putting this off for about a month, but I am now taking a perfectly good board and upgrading it to 6.0 firmware. So let's get started. This, by the way, is the U-Box 100 board if you've seen my other video, but it should work on any board. So we'll start with the VESC tool. Just to clarify, this video is only for upgrades to 6.0, not how to set up a new board. So there will be a separate video on that eventually. Right now, this is an upgrade video, not a new board setup video. This is the 6.0 VESC tool, and we're going to hit the scan button right here, scan BLE. I am running this on Linux, so I have the ability to connect to it directly. But if you're running on Windows, then you can always do TCP bridging. I'm doing this over Bluetooth, but if you're doing it over USB, it'll work just as good. USB is much faster actually, but if you don't want to open up your board, just do it over Bluetooth. It's safe, so that's what I always do. All right, so we'll hit connect here. And it will now warn me that my VESC has old but mostly compatible firmware. So that's expected because we have 5.3 firmware on here. So the first thing we do is do a backup. We back up our configuration. No need to name it. And that's it. Now we're ready to load new firmware. Also, I did use the old 5.3 tool and I saved the XML files just in case if I want to go back and restore doesn't work. So I did that, and I used the old tool just to make sure that nothing gets screwed up. But here now we're in the 6.0 tool and we're going to firmware. Now this is a Spinten U-Box 100. It seems that for some of you, if you don't already use my firmware, then included files will show nothing here, which means you need to go to custom file and then load a custom file. If you load a custom file, you first must load the bootloader. If you load an included file, the bootloader gets loaded for you automatically. But if you're doing a custom file, you go to bootloader here, you pick generic, which is usually the only choice, and you do that. Sounds scarier than it is, but loading the bootloader is really easy, and I've never heard of anyone having problems with it. And you don't need to reconnect after loading the bootloader. And then you're ready to load a custom file. Again, if you load an included file, then you don't need to worry about the bootloader because it gives you the bootloader automatically. So now I'm loading a custom file. Now if you do need a custom file, you will probably ask, where can I find it? I will post a link in the description where the VESC project keeps their firmware binaries. But very important, do not load one that you don't know where it comes from. It has to match your hardware. So that's one of the few ways how you can brick your VESC is by loading wrong firmware. So be very cautious about which file you pick. And ideally you want to verify down here. You see this HW, stands for hardware. So this is the hardware you got. And here it says U-Box single 100, which also matches the file that I just selected. And now I will load that. This usually takes up to a minute over Bluetooth. If it times out, no need to freak out. You can just try it again. You need to reconnect in most cases, but timing out usually, if anything goes wrong here, even if you now jump on the board and write off, nothing bad will happen because the download copies everything into a temporary memory location, and once it's done, the critical phase of the firmware download is those 10 seconds after it says it's done. That's the time when you could brick it by removing power from it. That's why there is this little bit misleading message popping up at the end. You definitely don't want to remove power during or after the firmware update, because the very next thing that you do after updating your firmware is to load the settings, because every time you load new firmware, you lose all your settings every time. So that's when people try out their board and say that it sounds like a lightsaber. Well, that's because it uses default motor settings. Let's accelerate this a little bit. So this now took, seems like a little over a minute. Seems like average Bluetooth performance to me. Oh yeah, now in 6.0 it actually goes to 99% and doesn't stop at something like 80 something, like 5.3 did. Alrighty, here we go. Firmware upload is done. Now we gotta wait. Now I have a buzzer, so I can hear when my board has rebooted, meaning I know that I can connect to it now. If you don't have it, just wait 10 seconds. That's usually plenty of time for it to reboot. And now we are connected. I can see firmware v6, and that is it. So now I can restore my configuration. It warns me the loaded configuration is from a different firmware, but that's expected. We just upgraded, and my configuration just got loaded. And in theory, I should be able to step on this board right now and it should balance. So, take the board, wrong way, take the board, is this visible in the screen? Yep. So, if I now engage, it should just work. There we go, that looks good. Let's see if it can handle me. Oh yeah, I had reverse stop enabled because I'm testing this foot sensor. So everything behaves as before, feels just like before. The next step is we want to get the float package loaded. So the new thing about 6.0, and one of the best features, is that it has the ability to load custom apps on top of the firmware, kind of like an app store on a phone, where you can load additional packages without replacing your firmware. So we're going to VESC packages, and by default you'll see the package store here. It only has 3 applications right now, and you always want to do update archive when you first start. And if we now click on float, we can see here we have float version v0.5. So now I would press install right here, but I have my own version that's v0.6, so I will load that. Let me see, if I hit this refresh button, it will load the info, so that's version v0.6. I will write that to the VESC. It takes a while on Bluetooth to write it, that's normal, but only about 20 seconds or so. Okay, so it is loaded, and you heard by the beep that the loading was successful. The buzzer, by the way, is connected the same way as on 5.3. It's just connected to the servo pin or the PPM pin. Now, after loading the package, you want to disconnect and then reconnect to it. And once you reconnect to it, you will see a float settings or float config area also, if you go to the welcome page, you will see this app UI. The 6.0 tool has one of the new features is that it basically has the mobile UI kind of embedded in here on the welcome page. And this is where the app UI shows up. With this new float package, you no longer want to go into balance, and you also no longer want the balance app selected. Now it says app to use balance. Is that correct? Let's load it. No, it got changed. So what we did in v0.5 and onward is we made it so that once the float package gets loaded, it automatically switches the app to use to UART, because you can't have the app to use be balance, because then you have two competing algorithms both trying to balance you. As you can imagine, that doesn't work well. So you want to keep it on UART. Do not set it to no app. I heard that for some people it works. I don't know what exactly the conditions are for which people it works, but for many people, if you don't select UART, then you lose your Bluetooth ability. And if you lose your Bluetooth, that means you've got to open up your board and connect over USB to fix it. So don't do it. To be clear, this is only for existing users who already have a working board on 5.3. This is not a tutorial for how to set up a new board on 6.0. That'll be a separate video. This is just the upgrade process. So the assumption is that your board already is configured, the IMU is configured, and all you do is back up and restore, and it'll just work. There is a new IMU wizard. You don't need to run it if your IMU is already calibrated. So we'll not even talk about it in this video. Basically, there's nothing you have to set except that there is a new field in the IMU, and if you load the default firmware, then it will have 0 here as a default. That is the accelerometer low-pass filter Z, but you want 1 Hertz here, which is the best value that we found. That is Mitch's magic fix for the nose hunting. That filter is here now. So make sure you have 1 Hertz in here. Everything else, leave the defaults. Oh, there's also a gyro low pass filter. I think it also defaults to 0. Set that to 100. That also helps with some situations. I think it makes the rate P smoother, but I don't want to go into that now. Just set it to 100 and it should be good. Here it should be on Mahoney and your old Mahoney KP and so on. So nothing here needs to be changed if you're restoring. We'll write the app config once. If we change this. Now the firmware that I built, I already set the defaults to include 1 Hertz for the low pass Z filter and the gyro low pass filter at 100. So I didn't have to make any changes. But if you're just using the built-in firmware, you definitely should make these changes and then write the app setting. Okay, now we go on to the float config. So this is the float package UI, the configuration UI, I should say. There's also the runtime UI. But the configuration UI is essentially based on the balance app and the balance configuration, but we now have tailored it so that it truly is targeting one wheels and only includes fields that are actually relevant, and every single field now does what it actually says. There's no more dead zone doing integral limiting, but instead all the fields have the right names. It really is what you see is what you get. So we have the tune page and tune modifiers. The old torque tiltback is still in here. You feel free to use it. I don't touch it anymore. I don't use it anymore. I only use ATR. Turn tiltback is now only yaw based, just like in the ATR firmware in general. And then there is this new ATR tab, which has all the ATR fields on one page, and you can play with those. Again, I'm not going to go into every little field here. Startup, tilt back, fault, everything is pretty much like before. Here is Nico's new remote functionality. So if you're setting up a remote, this is where you go. I haven't done it yet. I actually ordered one, so I will play with it too eventually, but I don't have it yet. And then specs. This is where you would put all the fields that you have to verify when you're setting up a board. What's cool about the float package is that the default values give you a writable board, with the one exception of specs. This has to be adjusted. So I have a 20S battery in here, which means I need 86 volts. I'll give it, 4.3 volts per cell. So I want 86 volts for high voltage tilt back, and then low voltage I want 3 times 20, so 60 volts. And then here your ADC switches. I think I need 2.5 in here. If you need to look, you can switch back to the balance app and see your old values. If you don't remember them, just don't forget to switch back to the UART app when you're done. And actually, if we do this right now, you can switch to the balance app and see your old values in here without writing. Do not hit write app settings. So it shows you the values that were loaded before. So I can peek here and see I had 3 volts for ADC1 and 2.5 for ADC2. Okay, so now just don't forget to set that back so you don't accidentally switch to the balance app. And by the way, I think on each boot, when the float package loads, it switches back to the UART app automatically if the balance app is selected. If any other app is selected, it will not switch automatically. So still make sure that you select UART. Okay, so we set 3 and 2.5. So that is that. Enable buzzer on servo/ppm. Yeah, I have a buzzer, so I want to use that. And let me just check my fault settings. But yeah, so these are Nico's defaults. They work well for everybody, but obviously you want to look over startup, tilt back, fault to put in the values that you liked before in the balance app. So these are just defaults. They work. They give you a board that is safe and writable, but obviously startup settings and tilt back settings and so on, they're really personal preference. So you want to make sure that you put in the values that you do like. And as you can see, features like enable dark ride and enable reverse stop, you no longer have to remember, oh, which value did I need to add a 0.1 to get reverse stop, or how do I do dark ride again? It's now a nice drop down, so super easy. Oh yeah, once you make these changes, you do not go and do write app configuration. That does nothing because it just writes all the other stuff here. You now need to use these buttons here. So you use this write button. That will apply your settings in the float package. All right, that is done. And now we're good. So now I need to go test ride. Still a little scary. I always hate upgrading boards that work perfectly fine. But I kind of have to do it because I finally finished the float control app to support 6.0, and I have custom shaping in there. So there's some really cool features and I'm excited to try them out. And I decided to only do it for 6.0 to kind of force me to switch myself. So let me know if you got any questions. I think it's pretty straightforward. So far, the feedback has been really positive on 6.0. Few people have run into issues. Most of the issues with 6.0 were actually due to people not reading the instructions on how to switch. So they started off with a clean configuration and just, I don't know, whatever people do that don't read the instructions, all kinds of things can happen. Yeah, because VESC is still not much easier than it was before. There's 1,000 ways to screw it up. So read the instructions, follow them to the T, and it'll just work out of the box. But another issue is if you're a brand new user. As a new user, it's a little tricky right now because your VESC comes with 5.3 pre-installed, I would say in most cases, at least as of December or January 2023. So if you have 5.3 pre-installed, I would recommend you follow the 5.3 videos and go through the whole process until your board is working perfectly. And once that is done, then you can follow this video from the beginning and you'll be able to upgrade to 6.0 without any issues. All right, I'm rambling again, so this is all I have. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.